There's a ticking time bomb quietly embedded in the American economy, one that doesn't explode with fire or smoke, but with higher prices, stagnant wages, and mounting pressure on every American wallet. It's called the national debt, and although you can't see it, it touches nearly every part of your daily life. So let's start with the basics. The national debt is the total amount of money that the federal government owes. It's accumulated over time when spending exceeds revenue, when Washington writes checks that the base can't cover. To make up the difference, the government borrows by issuing bonds, treasury bills, or other securities. Investors buy them, including banks, mutual funds, foreign governments, and even our own Federal Reserve. It's a little like an IOU system, except on a scale so large it feels unreal. Today, the federal government debt has surpassed $35 trillion and it's growing fast. That's more than the size of the entire U.S. economy. And this isn't just some abstract number sitting in a spreadsheet in D.C. It's a looming cost that shows up on your grocery bill, your rent, your mortgage, interest rate, and your future Social Security benefits. But let's go deeper. Where does this debt really come from and how does it work? Well, the debt is split into two parts. The publicly held debt, which is the amount borrowed from investors outside of the government, and the other is intergovernmental debt, which is borrowed from things like the Social Security Trust Fund. Right about now, $29 trillion is held by the public, and the rest is owed to government accounts. When people say China owns our debt, they're partly referring to the publicly held portion. So foreign nations like China and Japan hold a large percentage of it. Now, here's the kicker. Borrowing is one thing, but paying interest on that borrowing is another. And this is where things start to spiral out of control. Interest payments on the national debt are projected to hit $1.2 trillion this year alone. That's more than we spend on national defense, more than we spend on Medicaid, and more than we spend on every federal education program combined. That money doesn't build roads. It doesn't go to veterans. It doesn't help small businesses. It simply pays creditors because we spent money we didn't have for decades. In June, over 75% of the average American's income tax went to cover interest on debt. Yeah, you heard that correctly. 75% of your tax dollars didn't fund schools or roads or parks. It just paid interest on yesterday's overspending. That's not sustainable, it's not responsible, and that's not what any household, business, or country should consider to be normal. So how did we get here? First, we blame everyone in Congress. Tax and spend liberals and their culprits, big government conservatives. But the root cause is simple. For far too long, Washington has operated with a blank check mentality. Promises have been made with no serious plan to pay for them. Entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, while important, are on autopilot, growing year after year with no reforms to ensure their long-term viability. Meanwhile, spending has expanded far beyond core responsibilities like defense, infrastructure, and law enforcement. The manufactured COVID-19 pandemic poured fuel on the fire with trillions in emergency spending layered on top of an already bloated budget. There was just no plan to offset it, and now we're living with the consequences. Making matters worse, the Federal Reserve kept interest rates near zero for over a decade, making borrowing cheap and easy. This lulled policymakers into a false sense of security. But now that inflation is back with a vengeance, the Fed has been forced to raise rates, and suddenly all that cheap debt isn't so cheap anymore. Here's the reality. If rates stay elevated, and there's every reason to believe that they will, we'll soon be paying more in interest than we do on our entire military, for example. Within a decade, interest will become the single largest line item in the federal budget. That's like maxing out your credit cards, only to realize your monthly payment now exceeds your rent, your utilities, and your grocery bills combined. And then you apply for more credit cards to keep up with the minimum payments. So where does all this money go? Aside from interest, the largest chunks of the federal budget go to mandatory spending programs, primarily Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. These programs consume more than 2/3 of the budget and are growing rapidly due to demographic changes like the aging population. Then there's discretionary spending, which includes defense, education, transportation, and other things. This portion is debated and appropriated annually by Congress, but it's shrinking as a share of the percentage of the budget, crowded out by mandatory programs and rising interest payments. This is why so much of the federal budget is now on autopilot. Congress doesn't even vote on most of it anymore. The spending is locked in, and the more debt we accrue, the more interest we pay, leaving less room for priorities like border security, disaster relief, or military modernization. Some argue we can just raise taxes on the wealthy to fix this, but here's the problem. Even if we tax the richest Americans at 100% of their income, it wouldn't come close to covering the shortfall. The math just doesn't work. We have a spending problem, not a revenue problem. Others say we can print more money, But we've seen how that ends. Printing money to cover debt fuels inflation, which is already squeezing American households. It's a hidden tax, one that punishes savers, erodes paychecks, and hits the working class the hardest. The truth is, no serious nation can sustain this kind of fiscal recklessness. High-end debt makes us vulnerable. It weakens our economic foundations, it limits our strategic options, and it puts children and grandchildren on the hook for decisions they never made. And let's not forget national security. A heavily indebted nation loses leverage on the global stage. The more we borrow from foreign creditors, the more influence they hold over our economy. A strong economy is the bedrock of a strong defense. You can't build aircraft carriers and missile defense systems on borrowed money forever. So what can be done? First, we have to restore a culture of fiscal restraint. That means settling priorities, enforcing spending caps, and returning to regular budgeting, where Congress actually debates and approves line items instead of passing trillion-dollar omnibus bills no one reads. Second, we need to reform entitlements, not cut benefits, but modernize the programs to ensure long-term solvency. That includes gradually raising eligibility ages, tightening income thresholds, and reducing fraud and abuse. Third, we need to stop using emergency spending as a loophole to avoid accountability. Every dollar spent should be justified and offset, just like families and businesses have to do. The solution isn't radical, it's responsible. It's the kind of discipline that built this country in the first place, when thrift was a virtue, not a punchline. The national debt isn't just an economic issue, it's a moral one. We're borrowing money for today and expecting our children to pay it back tomorrow. That's not compassion, that's generational theft. We have time to fix it, but the window's closing. If we wait until a crisis hits, until interest rates explode, the dollar collapses, or markets lose confidence, it'll be too late. The cuts will be deeper, the pain will be sharper, and the options will be fewer. The debt bomb is ticking, and it's not someone else's problem. It belongs to all of us. Good luck on the campaign.